welcome to the Black Cat Bushcraft channel. Now that fall's officially arrived, I've been going through some of my kit items and pulling out some of those things that I feel like I'll want to use in the upcoming camping season. One of those particular items is my 8x8 oilskin tarp, which I have here. This particular one is made by Tentsmiths, and it's probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite tarp that I've ever owned. And honestly, I really enjoy using an 8x8 or a 9x9, in general a square tarp, because it lends itself to a lot of neat configurations. And there's one particular configuration that I enjoy most with this tarp. So I wanted to bring this out, set it up today, just go over everything, make sure everything's ready for camping season. And I figured I'd bring you along for the setup. This is not something that I originated myself. You may have seen other people use something very similar to this, but in case you haven't seen it, I did want to share this because it may give you an idea of something that you like to use as well. So stick with me. I'm going to pull out this tarp and we'll get it set up step by step. Alright, this is my 8x8 oilskin tarp here, and folded up in here I have basically everything for the most part that I need to set this shelter up. My personal opinion is when you're using an old-fashioned oilcloth type tarp, it just makes sense to use a natural style cordage. In this case, I'm using a cotton clothesline type cordage. That's not a necessity, it's just a personal preference. You could use any type of cordage, but for me, I just like using something that's natural, or a natural rope, something that just seems to fit aesthetically that tarp. The other thing I have here is 6 hand-carved tent stakes, and I carved these out of a dry pine, so they're very lightweight, and when you put them all together, they don't take up that much space. Obviously, I could leave these at home and I could carve tent pegs off the landscape when I want to set up my shelter, but why bother when I have room in my pack? And as far as carry weight, there's nothing to this. And these were carved when I had plenty of time, so I made them nice and neat and uniform, and they just seem to fit the shelter to me. So that's what I choose for my stakes. We need one other piece, which is going to be a tree trunk. I'll show you what I'm talking about, and we'll be able to set our shelter up. All right, I've gone ahead and laid my tarp out here, and before I go any further staking anything out, I need to attach 2 toggles to my guy lines. I simply have 2 pieces of that cotton cordage that I showed you before, and I literally broke 2 sticks off the wood line here behind me. To tie these on, I use a constrictor knot, which is simply wrap the cordage over top of itself, like you're gonna make a clove hitch. I'm gonna go over top here. Okay, just like that, making your X. Now you come around your standing end and go back to the center. That's where it differs from the clove hitch. And with that, this knot kind of binds on itself, and it really does do a good job, especially with this cotton cordage. It doesn't slip, and it gives you a nice secure hold. If you want to learn more about the constrictor knot, I do have an instructional video on my channel, how to tie a constrictor knot, and it's in the playlist of knot tying series. Alright, I've gone ahead and got my tarp laid out here in a diamond configuration. And with an 8x8 Tentsmith, if you count the corner, you'll have 5 tie-out points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Counting that corner is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth around all 4 sides of the tarp. What I'm going to do is come off this back corner, 1, 2 tie-out points, and I'm going to drive a stake in the ground right there. All right, and I'll come back and hammer these in good. Same thing from here, the back corner, 1, 2, and then I'm going to stake that one as well. Alright, and I'll come back and hammer these in. What will happen is we're going to fold this back corner up underneath of our tarp. Alright, for this next step, I'm simply going to take one of my guy lines with the attached toggle, and I'm going to run the end of the guy line up through the tie-out point, just like this. And that way the toggle is down on the bottom of the loop. You can see the Tentsmith logo here. Just center that toggle up. And now that's what we're going to use to pull the front of our shelter up with. Alright, what I did was cut a sweet gum tree down. It was just a small size sweet gum. It was a tree that was kind of in a bad spot, so it was no waste of a good tree. But what I'm going to do is use the fork in this tree here and run my cordage over top of that. And when I go over this fork right here, just to give me a nice secure hold, I'm going to wrap it. I made a figure 8 right there. I'm going to show you that again just in case it was hard to see. I pull my tarp tight, not too tight, Go over one side of the fork, over the other side. That gives me a figure 8. Now I can come back here and pull this tight and stake it out on the ground. All right, whenever I use a natural cordage like this for a guy line, I like to also use a taut line hitch to help keep those guy lines tight and to keep my shelter tight. In this case, I've just gotten the main mast over there laying on the ground with the tarp, and rather than trying to hoist that up and balance all that stuff while I tie a hitch, I just let it lay down. I'll tie the hitch and use that to hoist everything back up. Tying a taut line hitch is very simple. In this case, I'm just taking a bite around this stake, and I'll simply go around the standing end 1, 2 times, just like that. Now I'm going to just simply come out here on the outside of that loop and tie basically a half hitch. When you're working with this natural cordage, you do kind of have to dress the knot just a little bit at the end to make it look nice and neat so that it functions properly. But hopefully you can see what that looks like right there. I always thought that a taut line hitch does look like it's kind of a neat looking knot when you tie it tight. Right now I can use that to slip and adjust the tension and hoist up my shelter from the ground. And we'll do that right now. This is always easier to do when you have somebody helping you out here. In my case, I don't have that. Getting this pole right is something you just kind of have to play with and adjust. And then you can tighten it all up with your taut line hitch at the end. It's pretty tight there. It looks actually good just like it is. Now we'll stake out the corners. All right, now on this first corner, I'm just going to pull it tight against this other stake that's here in the back. And try to get that pretty tight because that makes your shelter form a little bit nicer. Just use my mallet to drive that in. All right, I'll come over here on this opposite corner, do the exact same thing, pulling it nice and tight. Good. One last step to go. All right, as I'm sure you can see here, we have a center tie-out point right here on the back of this tarp, and that's one of the things that I really like most about this particular tarp. Those tie-outs give you so much flexibility. What I'm going to do is take my last guy line, and I have this one cut exceptionally long on purpose. It gives me a lot of flexibility depending on where I'm setting up my tarp. And just to make my life easier, I'm just going to run this cordage down until I come up with that toggle. And that toggle is going to put a little less pressure on this loop than if I were to just tie my cordage directly to my tie-out point. All right, this last step is to take that guy line that we just ran through the center tie-out point, and I'm going to run this long piece of cordage all the way back here to a tree that's directly in line with my tarp. And just run it over a limb. That's why I have this cordage so long, is so I can run it back and connect it on trees or whatever I have. And probably the best choice for a knot here would be, again, a taut line hitch. So I'm going to throw that in there real quick. That taut line hitch is nice on this application because I can cinch down and pull this tarp as tight as I want, or as tight as I feel is safe to do that, and that completes our shelter. All right, this is the finished result with this shelter. I really like this shelter for a lot of different reasons. When I get in here, I can comfortably lay down and stretch out, but I still have room behind me if I want to keep my gear back in there. I like that having this tied out on the front and the back pulls the tarp so tight, because that helps it to shed water. When it starts to rain, instead of the tarp kind of sagging in, it stays tight and does a really good job in rain. Also, I like it because being a plow point style shelter, it kind of cuts the wind a little bit better. And while I've got that main mast kind of set up high, pulling the top up, if it were really windy or hard rain or whatever, I could always shorten that main mast, pull that line out further, and that way make my shelter a little bit lower and more secure against weather. It's just a very flexible configuration. It's comfortable. What I'd do is just put myself a ground cloth here, a moisture barrier, and then I'd have my wool blanket or whatever sleep system I was going to use. And then I can very comfortably get up in here and stretch out. You can see that. I'm about 6 foot 1 inches in height. so I can get up in here very easily, stretch out. I've still got another 2 foot of space behind me back here where that tarp's folded in, and that can be my gear space. Or if it was raining and the weather was bad, I could always scooch myself back up in here a little bit further. So it's just a great setup, and I really don't see anything wrong with it or any downfalls. The only thing that someone may complain about with this setup is that you can't have a fire right here because you got that main mast. So you either put your fire off to this side or that side, which is often the case with plow point shelters anyway. But it works great. You got your fire on one side, your firewood on the other. It just makes for a really good shelter, and I enjoy this one a lot. All right, just before I finished up, I wanted to give you one more real good look at the shelter and how it was set up. You can see my main mast there with the fork at the top. It's approximately 6 feet. That's about my height. You can see how I did the figure 8 here just to kind of keep my cordage in place on that, prevent slipping. If you pick the right mast, you can see how I have an extra branch there, and I use that to hang my haversack, or you could hang your tools or whatever off of that. A candle lantern would be great. You can see here on the front tie-out point how I use the toggle just to reduce the stress from cordage pulling on this, and that kind of distributes a little bit more evenly from side to side. You can see up under the shelter, that's that piece that folded in, gives you just a little bit of ground cover, but of course you'd need some extra ground cover, or utilize pine straw, natural bedding, things like that. And then I utilize 4 stakes here, one on this corner, and then right here, and then 2 on the opposite side. And then you can see I toggled out that center tie-out point and ran that cordage straight back here to this tree where I finished things off with the taut line hitch. Alright, I'd like to thank you guys for taking the time to tune in for this little tarp setup. Hopefully, if you haven't seen this will give you an idea of something that you can use, especially if you have a square style tarp, whether it be an 8x8, 9x9, 10x10, whatever. If it has decent tie-out points on it and gives you any flexibility, you can probably use something similar to this. This is one that I really enjoy, so I thought I'd share it with you. I appreciate your interest. I appreciate your support. I hope that you'll come back, visit often. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I'll definitely be talking to you with another video as soon as possible. Until then, take care. God bless.